dare you treat me like I don't belong under my own roof? You don't deserve to sit at this table. You've done nothing but hold us back.
The will says otherwise. This house, this family, was built on more than your convenience.
Mom, what are you saying?
I'm saying this isn't just supper, it's a reckoning. And you'll have to decide whether to stand with truth or with greed.
The silence after Maggie's words was sharper than any knife on the table. It pressed into every corner of the room, turning a simple family dinner into something that felt more like a trial. For too long, she had been the quiet figure in the background, the one who tended the house, filled the plates, and asked for nothing in return. Now, her voice carried the weight of years, steady and undeniable, reminding everyone that a life of sacrifice does not erase a person's worth. The table before them no longer held just food, it held the balance between love and betrayal, truth and greed. What had begun as a meal was already unraveling into judgment, and no one could look away. This was only the beginning. What came next was even heavier. If you believe in justice, type it in the comments and subscribe. The late afternoon light lay soft across the clapboard houses of Salem, and the little flags along Main Street flickered like breaths being held. Inside the Allen home, the dinner table was set with roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and a lemon pie cooling on the counter, the air warm with butter and citrus. Margaret Allen, Maggie, to the few who remembered her as more than a title, moved between kitchen and dining room with the steady grace of habit, placing water glasses, smoothing a napkin that did not need smoothing. She greeted the delivery kid earlier with a quiet thank you and slipped a folded bill into his palm, because he always tipped, even when the world forgot you. When Thomas and Catherine arrived with Emily, the noise rose in easy bursts. Door hinges, chair legs, a quick scrape of laughter. Maggie's smile held, gentle as a candle cupped against wind. She listened while Thomas talked about flights and hotels, about the rental car they would pick up in San Diego, about fish tacos and the Sunset Pier. He spoke with the fast certainty of a man arranging pieces on a board that belonged to him. Kate added bright confirmations, already picturing outfits and sunshine. Emily said little, glancing now and then at her grandmother, the way a young person looks at a harbor before a storm, unsure whether to trust the horizon. They filled their plates, passed the bowl of salad, and touched briefly on the town's preparations for the 4th of July, folding chairs stacked in garages, the wooden stage rising by the harbor, the community band rehearsing Sousa marches in the high school gym. Maggie cut the chicken with a quiet hand. When no one asked, she did not mention that she knew a place by the water where the fireworks threw their colors onto the skin of the harbor, where she used to stand with her husband and count the red streaks as they fell. Thomas raised a glass of iced tea and said they should toast to a long-needed vacation. The clink of glass off glass was small and buoyant. There was a brief silence afterward, a seam in the talk, and Maggie slipped a question into it, no sharper than a knitting needle. And where do I sit on the plane? Thomas did not look up right away. Kate set down her fork. Emily's glance flashed to her father and back. Thomas cleared his throat and aimed for practical. Mom, it's a long flight. We figured it would be easier on you to stay home this time. You know, water the plants, keep the house, avoid all the airport hassle. San Diego crowds can be a lot. The words were smooth and planned, like stones skipping water. Kate nodded with a sympathetic tilt. We don't want you to get tired. You said your knee acts up, remember? Emily shifted in her seat, the chair whispering against wood. The kitchen clock ticked with a soft insistence. Maggie's hands folded in her lap. She pressed her thumbs together, two small birds deciding whether to fly. She felt something old and familiar rise in obedient breath, an apology waiting to be spoken. She told it to sit back down. She put on her kind smile and asked about sunscreen and snacks for the trip, about what shoes Kate would bring for the boardwalk, and if Emily had found her sketchbook. She passed the mashed potatoes. She gave a recipe tip about adding a touch of sour cream. She reminded Thomas to lock the back door when they left for the airport. Conversation resumed with relief, like a train finding its track again. The polite engine of family life chuffing forward. After dessert, Thomas and Kate gathered plates, insisting they would clean up. Maggie led them, for once not racing to fill the quiet with usefulness. She stood on the back steps for a minute, cradling her elbows. Out beyond the maples, trial fireworks popped as the town tested timing. They unsettled the pigeons and made the dog next door give a tired bark. The air smelled of cut grass and distant ocean. Maggie looked up at the strip of sky visible between roofs and remembered her husband's habit of naming cloud shapes to make her laugh. She did not cry. The tears that would have come belonged to another woman, a younger one, trained to ask permission before wanting. They left with hugs that landed lightly, careful not to smudge anything. On the threshold, Emily lingered. "Grandma," she said, voice low and unsure. "You know," she did not finish. She did not have to. Maggie squeezed her wrist. "I know, sweetheart. Travel safe," she said, and smiled with her eyes as well as her mouth. The way you do when you need someone to believe you are steadier than you feel. The house, once quiet, deepened into something else when the door shut. Silence settled like a soft shawl on her shoulders, warm and a little heavy. She washed the last glass, wiped the table in small circles, and straightened the stack of mail by the bread box. There was nothing urgent in the envelope's grocery coupons, a church newsletter announcing a bake sale, a reminder about street parking on parade day. She turned off lights one by one and climbed the shallow staircase to her room. On the dresser lay a scarf she had not worn in years, a blue that used to flatter her skin when she still cared if she was seen. She touched it, then left it in place, like a promise she was not ready to claim. The night was kind to her. She slept the uncomplicated sleep that sometimes arrives when worry is tired of hearing itself talk. In the morning, the house felt rinsed. Sunlight climbed past the curtains with quiet determination. She brewed coffee, the old machine hissing like a forgiving friend. She buttered toast and took it plain, no jam, because today her hands did not need sweet. On the porch, the wooden boards were cool under her feet. The town sounded alive in that New England way. A truck shifting gears, a neighbor dragging a hose across the lawn, goats debating something rude over by the river. The flag on her railing lifted and fell, lifting and falling like an old chest at rest. Maggie carried the small kitchen trash to the bin and looked at the mailbox. It was absurd, of course, that a person could feel watched by a mailbox, but she felt it all the same, as though the red flag were a narrow eye. She walked to it, unlatched the metal mouth, and reached in. Among the coupons and utility bill lay a white envelope, not stamped, not creased by sorting machines. Her name was not on it. She knew the travel agency's polite logo in the corner from years of collecting other people's trips. Her thumb hesitated on the flap, an old habit asking if she was allowed. Then she opened it. Inside were papers that made the kitchen floor tilt, only slightly, like a boat that has found a wave. The flights to San Diego with seats grouped and meal preferences highlighted, all bright and tidy, the hotel confirmation, the line about ocean view, the rental car reservation with an upgrade suggested, names printed in careful type. She ran her finger along them as if they might lift under her touch. Thomas, Catherine, Emily, that was all. She put the papers back as carefully as she had taken them out, smoothing the edges with a gentle attention she once gave a child's feverish hair. She did not sit down in the porch chair. She did not pace. She stood and watched the sparrow land, hop along the railing, and fling itself into air as if the air had always been a net. She returned to the kitchen, placed the envelope on the table, and made a fresh cup of tea for no practical reason. Steam curled up, thin and clean. She thought of the way Thomas's jaw set when he believed he was right, of how Kay could make kindness sound like a closing door, of Emily's unsettled glance. She thought of the 4th of July stage on the harbor and the wooden chairs her husband once reserved with a hand-lettered sign and a little string, as though claiming space could be done with paper and twine. She thought of the blue scarf upstairs, the one she had touched but not taken. The kettle clicked off as if it, too, had reached a decision. Maggie wrapped her fingers around the warm mug and felt, not the rise of indignation, but a steadier thing. A beam laid at last across an open span. She did not tell herself big answers or loud vows. She did not need them. She stretched her back, lifted her chin, and let the day sit on her shoulders without apology. The next morning, she opened the mailbox and found an envelope with plane tickets to San Diego without her name. The morning opened with a pale wash of light over Salem, the kind that made porches look newly painted and lawns smell faintly of dew and cut grass. Maggie rinsed the coffee pot, set it to brew, and listened to the soft hiss as if it were a friendly voice. She buttered a slice of toast and ate it standing by the sink, watching a gull circle once and disappear above the maples. The house felt orderly, dishes stacked, chairs pushed in, the quiet neatness that comes after company leaves, and every sentence had settled. She thought of Emily's uncertain glance the night before, the way the girl had hovered as if wanting to say more and choosing not to. That small look stayed with her, a knot tied in a string to mark a place she could not forget. She carried the coffee to the porch and opened the mailbox, not expecting anything beyond coupons and church bulletins. The white envelope sat there, as if it had been placed by a careful hand. No stamp. Travel agency logo in the corner, mild as a smile. She read the names printed inside, each one crisp. Thomas, Catherine, Emily. She touched the paper where another name might have gone and found only air. For a breath, she let the quiet turn into a small ache. Then she folded the confirmations back into the envelope, smoothed the edges, and set it on the kitchen table with the respect one gives a guest who has said something unkind but true. She took her mug and her purse and walked to Main Street. Salem was waking up. An old couple with a tiny dog did their slow circuit past the park. A boy pedaled a bicycle with a milk crate tied to the back. Flags along the storefronts lifted and fell like the town breathing. The bell on the cafe door gave a polite ring when she pushed it open. Inside, a chalkboard promised blueberry muffins, and a barista with a silver nose ring called her ma'am without making her feel small. Maggie ordered a small coffee and a plain muffin, left a tip in the jar stamped with a smiling mermaid, and chose a corner table where the light fell kind. She placed the travel envelope beside her napkin and brought out her phone. Her hands did not shake the way they often had when she called to ask for help. She searched for the agency number, pressed the screen, and waited with the patient quiet of someone who has stood in many lines and learned the secret. If you do not fidget, time moves a little faster. A young voice answered, bright and practiced. Thank you for calling. How may I help you today? I'd like to cancel a set of flights and reservations, Maggie said. Her tone was even as if she were reciting a grocery list. Of course. Ma'am, I'll need a confirmation number. Maggie read it out. The girl typed. The espresso machine sighed like a tired horse. And, may I ask for the reason, just for our records? No, Maggie said, and then, gentler, just cancel them, please. A small pause, no longer than a breath. Understood. I'm processing that now. It may take a moment. Maggie looked out the window while the clicks came and went in her ear. On the sidewalk, two teenagers compared sneakers and laughter, and the shop owner across the street propped open his door with a bucket of flowers. The girl returned, all set, ma'am. You'll receive an email confirmation shortly. Thank you, Maggie said, and meant it. She ended the call and sat with the neatness of what she had done. No fanfare, no drum roll, just a decision placed in the world and allowed to stand. She wiped the crumb from the envelope and slid it into her purse, then opened the new page on her phone's browser. The letters came slowly under her thumbs. Flights to New Orleans. She had never gone. In her 20s, she had clipped a magazine picture of a balcony with iron lace, a night sky the color of ink, a saxophone's curl marked by a hand she did not know. She had tucked the clipping into a cookbook and forgotten it until years later, when the pages fell out of their bindings and the picture drifted to the floor. That balcony lived somewhere in the back of her mind, patient as a lantern. The search showed options and prices and seats marked with tiny diagrams. She studied them the way she once studied instructions for a new recipe, alert to the steps no one told you mattered most. She chose a morning departure out of Boston Logan, arriving in New Orleans in the early afternoon, a reasonable layover, an aisle seat so she wouldn't have to bother anyone when her knees stiffened. She looked at the total and felt a brief swoop in her stomach, the kind that says, "Are you sure?" She told herself the truth. She was sure enough. She typed her information, pressed purchase, and watched the spinning circle complete itself like a small moon closing. Going somewhere? A familiar voice said. Maggie looked up. Carol from 3 houses down stood with a paper cup and a smile that could carry a casserole and a secret at the same time. She wore a baseball cap and the kind of sunglasses that make a person look either important or late. I might, Maggie said. It felt delicious, not to explain. Well, good, Carol replied, as if she had been waiting years to approve of this exact sentence. I'll water the ferns if you like, and the basil. Yours was looking a little sulky last week. I would appreciate that, Maggie said. I'll leave the gate unlocked. Leave it locked, Carol said, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. Just put the spare under the turtle planter. I can be trusted with reptiles. They laughed. She told Carol she would bring back a small something if she saw one worth bringing. Carol said not to bother unless it was pralines. They parted with a wave that felt like permission. Maggie finished her coffee and took the long way home. Salem held his small rituals up to the light that morning and found them good. A man rehummed bunting on his porch. A woman chalked a hopscotch grid for the children. A delivery truck eased around the corner with the patience of a large animal. By the time Maggie reached her front steps, the decision had settled in her bones like warmth. She swept the kitchen, not because it needed it, but because she liked the inevitability of crumbs turning to tidy lines. She made a list on a notepad she kept by the telephone. Neighbor key, stop mail, water plants, turn lamp on timer, check windows. The letters were round and careful. She enjoyed the look of them. She dialed the airline to double-check the new ticket. The agent confirmed the details and called her ma'am in a way that made the word feel like a small bow. When she hung up, she stood at the sink and looked at her hands, at the soft map of veins and the faint flower line around the ring that no longer circled her finger. These hands had lifted babies and grocery bags, folded church bulletins, held cool cloths to warm foreheads, and chopped onions through tears of all kinds. They could lift a suitcase. They could hold a boarding pass. Her phone buzzed. A text from Thomas? A question about recycling pickup. She answered it simply. Another text arrived. A photo Emily had taken of the harbor at dusk, the sky a gentle blue-gray, the water polite. No caption. Maggie typed a heart and erased it, then wrote, beautiful, and sent it. There would be time later for the more complicated words. At noon, she walked to the bank and withdrew a modest envelope of cash. The kind that makes a person feel the world will not ask for anything she cannot give. She bought a small combination lock for her suitcase at the hardware store and a travel-sized bottle of shampoo that claimed to be restorative without explaining what it restored. On her way home, she stopped at a thrift shop and found a slim paper bag of New Orleans photographs. The pages heavy, the blacks rich. She paid in cash and left the change in the donation jar. The afternoon softened. She ate a bowl of soup standing at the kitchen counter, the way she had learned to do when there was too much to do to bother with placemats. She called the church office and told them she would miss the bake sale on Sunday. The secretary said they would save her a piece of strawberry shortcake if she sent word back of a safe arrival. She phoned Carol and arranged the key under the turtle planter, and Carol said she would check the porch lights and scare off any raccoons who tried to claim tenants' rights. And if a package comes, Carol added, I'll drag it inside before some porch pirate decides your taste is his taste. In the late afternoon, she pulled her small suitcase from the back of the closet. It was navy, with a scuff near one wheel from a trip she could no longer place. She opened it on the bed and let the empty space sit there until it felt like invitation instead of demand. Into that space, she placed a soft dress that did not wrinkle easily, 2 pairs of slacks, a light cardigan, the walking shoes that had proven their loyalty on many a grocery aisle, and the blue scarf she had left on the dresser the night before. She added a small folding umbrella because rain, like grace, sometimes arrived without an appointment. She set aside a paper bag for the plane and a ballpoint pen because the world still offered forms that wanted ink. As she moved through the rooms to check windows, the house seemed to adjust its breathing to hers. The clock in the hallway took its steady steps. The refrigerator murmured. She paused at the photograph of her husband on the mantel and touched the frame with the back of her fingers. I'll bring you back a story, she said, and the room did not argue. Her phone rang once, twice. She let it. She could return calls later, when words would not be pulled from her like thread. She filled a glass with water and stood by the kitchen table where the travel envelope had rested earlier. A small circle of condensation blossomed under the glass and faded. Outside, a child shouted with joy at nothing in particular. The sound made her smile. When the sun tipped toward evening, she sat with her list and added one last line. Call Emily from the airport. She drew a small box beside it and left it unchecked. A gift to the person she would be in the morning. She turned off lights. She fed a pinch of kibble to a neighborhood cat who sometimes mistook her porch for an inn. She washed her hands, dried them on the same towel she had used all week, and felt its softness tell a story of many washings. The day had not been dramatic. It had been a series of small, courteous doors opened and walked through. She went to her bedroom and pulled the top drawer of her dresser, the one where important things lived. She opened the drawer to find a long, unused passport, set it on the table beside the blue scarf she once wore in her youth. Salem woke to a sky the color of fresh milk, and Maggie moved through her small house with the unhurried care of someone who has spent years making mornings gentle. She checked the list she had written in round letters the night before, touched each line as if it were a rung on a ladder, and added one more. Call Emily from the airport. She left a note by the telephone, then zippered her navy suitcase and set it by the door. The taxi arrived with a soft honk. The driver, a young woman with a baseball cap and a thermos of coffee, hopped out to lift the bag. They traded easy words about traffic and the weather along the coast, and Maggie settled into the back seat, watching Salem's porches and buntings slide by like pages being turned. Boston Logan opened around her in long glass breaths. High ceilings that caught light, polished floors that offered patient reflections, voices stitched together from all over. She moved at her own pace, smiling a little when a blue-shirted agent offered her a tray for her shoes and a reassuring nod for her knee. People threaded themselves through the ropes in loose lines, the way water finds a familiar path. A young attendant pointed her toward the right concourse with the sort of practiced kindness that made the word ma'am feel like welcome rather than distance. Maggie thanked him and kept going. The coffee at the concourse newsstand tasted like determination. She drank it near a window and watched a sequence of planes rise, small bodies lifting into larger air. When boarding began, she stepped forward with the other Aussie travelers and found her place 2/3 back. The seat beside her sat empty until the last sweep of passengers delivered a man in his 30s, wedding band bright on his hand, a paperback sticking out of his jacket pocket. "Is this you?" he asked, pointing. "It is," she said, "and this is me." She patted the armrest with a dry smile. He laughed, grateful for the ease, and stowed his bag. The plane rolled and climbed. New England pinwheeled beneath them. Quilted fields, the pale line of a river, a scatter of roofs. The man spoke softly once or twice, a traveler's small questions. "Are you heading home or away?" "Away," she answered, and left it there because away was the truest word she had. He nodded and read. She closed her eyes and imagined a balcony with iron lace and the sound of a horn wrapping the night in something warm. When she dozed, she dreamed not of departures, but of doors opening without creak. They sat down in New Orleans under a sky that had learned to hold heat and give it back with a low hum. The air hugged her as she stepped onto the jet bridge, a breath heavy with river and spice. Signs led to baggage claim in cheerful fonts. A brass trio on a poster promised music every night. A woman at a kiosk sold bottles of water cold enough to make the palms ache. Maggie bought one and said, "Thank you," and the woman said, "Welcome, baby," the way only certain cities can. And Maggie felt the word land like a hand on her shoulder. A taxi carried her along a highway laced with billboards and then into streets that grew narrower and older, shutters tilting like eyelids, porches deep enough to hold whole conversations out of the sun. Her little hotel was tucked on a quiet block where a crepe myrtle scattered blossoms like confetti, where the desk clerk slid a key across with the sort of pride people have when a place has been loved by many. "Breakfast is simple," the clerk said. "Coffee, fruit, a few pastries. If you want music, turn right when you leave, then right again. If you want quiet, turn left." She turned left first. The room held a bed dressed in white and a small fan that hummed without complaint. She set the suitcase by the closet, ran cool water over her wrists, and breathed until travel air turned into room air. She changed her shoes for the walking pair that had softened to her steps, tied the blue scarf with a loose knot at her throat, and went back out with a kind of anticipation that feels like a letter finally being opened. French Quarter streets spread into little stages. Banisters traced iron stories over doorways, and ferns spilled from baskets as if they could not keep their joy to themselves. A trumpet stitched the afternoon to itself from somewhere just ahead. Maggie let the crowd take and release her, a warm tide. She paused for a beignet at a cafe window and laughed softly when the powdered sugar chose her scarf as an audience. She brushed it away with the back of her wrist, left a tip for the woman at the register, and stepped on, pocketing the napkin because it still had a clean corner. Near a small square, a man in a straw hat blew a blues riff that bent the hour and made passers-by walk a fraction slower. Children clapped without rhythm and were forgiven for it. A pair of old friends argued amiably about nothing under a striped awning. The smell of onions and pepper and the low-cooked patience drifted from a doorway with a chalkboard menu. Maggie followed it inside. The room was cool and honest. A ceiling fan turned. A server with a towel over his shoulder nodded her toward a table by the window. She ordered gumbo, unsweet tea with lemon, and a small plate of okra, because the server said the kitchen did it right. When the bowl arrived, the steam brought every spice to attention. She tasted, closed her eyes for the length of a breath, and felt something unclench. She reached for the salt out of habit. "You use too much salt," a voice said, not unkindly. Maggie looked up. The woman at the next table wore her silver hair in a knot that would not suffer foolishness, half-moon glasses resting low as if they were evaluating the room. Her eyes were sharp and curious. She lifted her own spoon like a witness. "Do I?" Maggie said. "You were about to," the woman replied. "This place knows their seasoning. Trust them until they give you a reason not to." Maggie set the shaker down, amused. "Noted, Eleanor," the woman said, offering a hand across the aisle with an efficiency that suggested many meetings made succinct. "Maggie," she answered, and shook it. They ate in companionable quiet for a few bites. The okra was bright and not at all slippery. The gumbo carried a depth that spoke of hours. Eleanor dabbed at the corner of her mouth with a folded napkin and tilted her head. "First time here?" "First time anywhere in a long time," Maggie said, and watched Eleanor weigh the answer, hear more than the words. "Well," Eleanor said after a moment, "you are behaving admirably for a person out of practice. Walking alone is half of any adventure." Maggie laughed, a warm, surprised sound that made the server glance over and smile, because laughter is a language everyone understands. "And the other half?" she asked. "Letting yourself enjoy the walking," Eleanor said. "And saying yes when a city offers you something that has your name on it." They traded a few facts the way strangers do when a bridge is being built. Maggie did not offer a family tree. Eleanor did not ask. Eleanor mentioned years in the classroom, convincing teenagers that commas were not optional and that dignity was not extra credit. Maggie admitted to a garden that sometimes minded her and sometimes did not. Eleanor spoke about heat and how to navigate it. Walk on the shade side, drink before you are thirsty, pause because pausing is not a failure. Maggie took notes in her head. Outside, the light tilted toward late, and the trumpet stitched a different tune. The server cleared plates and left 2 spoons and a small shared slice of something lemon, because he liked the sight of friendship showing up on a summer afternoon. They tasted and agreed that tartness was a form of honesty. Eleanor glanced at Maggie's scarf. "That blue is working for you," she said. "It says you remember exactly who you were, and you are in the process of remembering again." Maggie touched the knot, surprised at how right the sentence felt. "It was waiting in the drawer," she said. "I think it was patient." "Good things often are," Eleanor said. The door opened and a gust of heat bowed into the room before retreating. For a moment, the whole place smelled of sun on river water. Maggie breathed it in and felt the day arrange itself around a new center. She did not need declarations. She had a spoon and good company, and a city that seemed willing to say her name back to her. They stood at nearly the same time, the way people do when a rhythm has been found. Eleanor placed bills under her plate and added a tip that made the server's eyes soften. Maggie did the same. They lingered by the doorway like readers who have agreed to turn the page at the same moment and are a little reluctant to rush. Eleanor smiled, lines at her eyes deepening in a way that made age look like an earned map. "Tomorrow I'm walking the French Quarter. Would you like to come?" Maggie hesitated, then her eyes lit up. Morning in New Orleans arrived with a soft insistence of light slipping under shutters, and Maggie woke to the hum of a ceiling fan turning like an old friend who knew the room by heart. She dressed in a cotton blouse the color of cream, tied the blue scarf loosely at her throat, and stepped into a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon oil and clean towels. At the front desk, the clerk lifted a hand in greeting and told her the coffee on the sideboard was fresh. She poured a cup and stood for a moment at the open door, watching a cat consider a patch of sun as if it were a matter for a committee. She remembered Eleanor's invitation from the afternoon before and felt her body answer yes before her mind had time to explain itself. They met on the corner beneath a balcony draped with ferns, the ironwork tracing shadows on the pavement. Eleanor wore walking shoes and a hat with a brim that made sense in a city that asked you to respect the sun. Rule 1, she said, without prelude, is water. Rule 2 is shade. Rule 3 is to act as if you belong, because you do. I can follow rules, Maggie said, and meant it in more than one way. They walked the French Quarter by a map that existed mostly in Eleanor's memory. It was a cartography of small mercies. Which block caught a breeze, which corner store kept their fruit cold, which alley carried the echo of a horn at certain hours. Bakery windows breathed sugar. A florist folded brown paper around stems and tied them with string like quiet promises. A street painter worked at an easel and did not glance up. He was too busy catching a color that would not trouble him again. At a cafe with wobbly tables, they ordered cafe au lait served in bowls, and Maggie left a few folded bills in the tip jar because some gratitude is better announced. Eleanor, who had once kept the classroom in orderly rebellions, watched the city like a teacher watches students who have become themselves fondly and without interference. They walked to the river. The Mississippi moved as it always had, with a patience that mocked clocks. Tourists gathered under awnings for relief. Delivery man traded the language of nods. A child reached for a pigeon and learned again the nature of flight. Maggie leaned on a rail that had survived every summer the city had given it, and thought of how something can endure without hardening. I forgot how to do this, she said. Do what? Eleanor asked. Let the day happen to me, Maggie said, without trying to manage it into obedience. Eleanor considered that, then made a small sound that might have been agreement or approval. You're doing fine, she said, and offered a quarter to a saxophonist who was testing a reed. And so is the day. Dong, 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 dong. Dong 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 dong. They ate a late breakfast at a counter where the cook smiled without asking questions. Maggie ordered eggs and grits because the woman beside her ordered eggs and grits and seemed pleased by the outcome. The cook slid plates across with a grace that came from years. A small tip jar by the register wore a handwritten sign that said thank you before anyone needed to be taught their manners. When they were finished, Eleanor touched the rim of her plate to anchor her next sentence. I take a rest in the midday if I can, she said. Heat makes fools of those who think they are exceptions. Shall we sit a while in the church? They stepped into a cool nave where candles made their steady arguments. A few people knelt, others sat, and let their breathing find them again. Maggie walked slowly down a side aisle and studied stained glass that had outlasted many kinds of weather. She read a small plaque about repairs after a storm and felt the language of rebuilding pressed gently against her ribs. On the wooden pew, she let her eyes close and counted heartbeats, until the chatter of her thoughts fell to a level reasonable for company. Eleanor did not speak. The silence companioned them as deliberately as any sentence could have. Back on the street, the sun had risen to its full voice, and even the shade seemed to negotiate. They chose a quieter route, where vines paired with brick and a single ceiling fan spun on the porch without haste. One more block, Eleanor said after a while. Then I declare us worthy of lunch. Inside a small diner, the kind that collects regulars the way trees collect birdsong, they found a booth. A waitress set down water and announced the day's specials without a threat of apology. Po' boy with shrimp, gumbo, If you need a bowl of something honest, sweet tea that will make a northerner rethink every opinion they ever had. Maggie smiled. A bowl of something honest, she said, and Eleanor nodded approval. As they ate, Maggie's phone vibrated on the table, a brief insect of sound against the wood. She turned it face down without looking. It buzzed again and again. Eleanor lifted an eyebrow, not prying, merely noticing. They'll leave a message, Maggie said. She lifted her spoon and let it rest. My son and his wife, they believe in emergencies when the situation no longer reports to them. Eleanor's mouth quirked. Classroom maxim, she said. A crisis is often the moment when the system meets a boundary it didn't plan for. Boundaries feel rude, Maggie said, until you live without them long enough to notice the bruise. Eleanor tipped her glass toward that truth. You are allowed to go quiet, she said. Silence is not always punishment. Sometimes it is a clean plate where the meal can be served without the scraps of the last argument. Maggie's phone stilled. A few breaths later, it chimed for a message, and then again, as if the sender believed persistence could substitute for listening. She did not pick it up. Outside the window, a boy ran past holding a trumpet case as if it contained both weight and future. They parted in the early afternoon with a plan to meet later when the heat would withdraw its hand. Back at the hotel, the room greeted Maggie with a unique hospitality of air that has been cooled on purpose. She lay down and closed her eyes, not to sleep but to practice stillness. A steady thread of melody drifted up from somewhere, a trumpet leaning into a phrase until it found the heart of it. She did not think about logistics or lists. She held the day in her hands and allowed it to be enough. Near evening, she walked back toward the quarter, where awnings cast longer shadows and faces began to loosen in expectation. She followed the tug of a saxophone to a narrow room with wood floors and a bar that had known many elbows. The sign above the door did not make promises it could not keep. It simply named the place where music happened. The tables were small and candlelit. A few locals sat like people who would leave a critique only to the air. The quartet tuned without theater, then eased into a standard that belonged to the room as much as the chairs did. The drummer's brushwork stitched the edges. The bassist drew a line you could balance on. The pianist let chords bloom like wry smiles. And the saxophone told the truth without blinking. Maggie chose a table near but not too near. The server brought water, then asked if she wanted anything stronger. Just this, she said, tapping the glass. And I will leave a tip like someone who understands gratitude, she added with a small grin that made the server chuckle. She watched the musicians lean into one another's choices. It looked like trust. It sounded like breathing when breathing is deliberate. Around her, conversation settled into respectful murmurs. A couple held hands on the table, as if the gesture kept the day from running off. A man near the bar closed his eyes and smiled. A private thank you to a solo that did not require applause to land. Maggie let her shoulders drop the inch they had been holding without her permission. In that inch was a year, maybe 5. She thought about the tiny habits that had taught her to be available for everyone else. The way she answered the phone on the first ring, the way she counted spoons after a family meal, the way she wrote lists to make her life look tidy. She did not scold herself for those habits. They were simply tools she no longer needed in every room. The horn rose and fell like a tide, and the song found her softer places and made space there. When a set break came, she ordered a small plate of red beans and rice and ate it without rushing. She placed cash and a folded bill in the jar set by the stage because some gratitude cannot wait for the check. The saxophonist, passing her table with a towel around his neck, tipped his head. "Thanks for listening," he said, and the sentence felt exactly right. Back in the flow of the evening, with street lamps haloed in a new light, Maggie stepped into a breeze that had remembered its manners. She walked aimless on purpose, wanting only to feel the angle of the night against her skin. The phone in her bag vibrated again. She stopped on the quiet block under a balcony where someone had hung wind chimes over a pot of mint and took it out. Screen full of missed calls, voicemails stacked like dishes no one had washed. A text from Thomas, long and tight. Another from Kate, short and pointed. Then a message from Emily, a photograph of a sketch in charcoal of a harbor she had rendered braver than the one that actually existed. Under it, Emily had typed, "Thinking of you." Maggie felt the ground under her feet become particular and kind. She opened the voice memo app and pressed record. The city waited. "Thomas," she said, and her voice came out level, not sharp, not fragile. "I am all right. I will talk when you and Kate are ready to listen without managing. I am not angry. I am done with the role you wrote for me. I love you. That does not mean I will apply for the same part again." She hesitated, not for doubt, but to choose the last sentence precisely. "We can begin again when the first word between us is respect." She pressed stop and sent it. As one sends a letter they finally had the courage to write years ago. She stood there with the quiet buzzing in her hands and felt neither triumph nor fear, only alignment, a spine stacking itself the way it should. A couple passed, speaking softly about a restaurant they might try the next night. The chimes above her made a sensible sound. Somewhere a trumpet found the beginning of a ballad and asked the evening to agree. She walked back toward the jazz room for the second set, and her steps felt like they belonged to a person who could choose. The band took the stand again, and the drummer counted them in with a light tap that made every ear lean forward. Notes lifted, crisscrossed, and settled into a shape that could carry a name. Maggie set her phone face down on the table and left her hand resting on its back as if it were a small animal she had decided not to take home. She breathed with the music, and the music gave the breath back without condition. When the last tune closed its circle and the room let go together, she thanked the server and slipped a final bill under the glass. Outside, the night air had cooled into civility, and the stone held warmth that would not be spent until morning. She turned toward her hotel, counting blocks not as distances but as a sequence of small agreements she had made with herself. A man sang under his breath as he walked by, a line about leaving and arriving that sounded like it had learned patience the hard way. In her room, the fan hummed a familiar benediction. She washed her face, folded her scarf, and sat for a while on the edge of the bed, not to think but to feel the shape of the day. When she finally reached for her phone, it lit up at once with new messages. She let them settle, then decided a single text could carry the right weight to the right person. She wrote slowly, erased nothing, and sent it. Then she set the phone on the nightstand, turned off the light, and lay down, hand on her own heartbeat, as if to greet the neighbor she had missed for years. Her phone vibrated on the table, and the screen woke to a new photo. Emily had sent a picture of the family table at home sitting empty, with a message beneath it that read, "I think they're starting to understand. When are you coming home?" The late afternoon in Salem carried a salt softness from the harbor, and the Allen house gathered it in like a room taking a quiet breath before guests arrive. Maggie set the table with steady hands, not out of duty but to mark the hour. Plates with a thin blue ring, glasses that chimed faintly when nudged, cloth napkins folded in thirds as if they, too, were preparing to listen. She kept the menu simple, and con-roasted chicken brushed with lemon, potatoes beaten until they surrendered, green beans with a polite snap, a tart waiting in the cool to finish the evening with brightness. Emily arrived first and hovered near the doorway to the kitchen, the way light hovers at the edge of water. "Need help?" she asked. "I'm all right," Maggie said, and the words landed with more meanings than the small room could hold. Thomas and Kate came in with a gust of talk about traffic and parking. He brought a bottle of iced tea under his arm as if it counted as contribution. She carried a bouquet from the grocery, the kind that promises cheer without committing to scent. They made a small show of cleaning up the last plates. "Sit, Mom, we've got it," and then took their seats, one at each side, leaving the chair to Maggie's right for Emily. The clatter subsided into the sound of forks finding their places and water being poured. For several minutes, ordinary sentences did their job. "How are you? How is this? Did the neighbor's dog stop barking at the mail carrier?" Maggie answered gently, where answering was required, and let the rest pass like a slow boat on the river. At a seam in the talk, Kate arranged her napkin with that crispness politeness learns when it is about to scold. "We were surprised to find our vacation canceled," she said in a voice that wore concern like a tailored coat. "We had to make some embarrassing calls." Thomas leaned back as if to make room for the idea that he was above injury. "It put us in a difficult position," he added. "You should have told us if you had an issue with the plan." Maggie did not sigh. She placed her fork down, polished a spot on the table that did not need polishing, and reached into her bag, which she had set under the chair when she came in. The envelope she brought out was thick, the paper flat and uncreased as a fresh sheet of truth. She set it between the salt and the bowl of beans and tapped it once, as you might tap a good book, to indicate where the story turns. "These are the confirmations and the cancellations," she said, and her voice was level as a carpenter's tool. "I made the calls, I spoke clearly, I was not invited, so I declined the arrangement." Emily's eyes flicked from envelope to faces as if watching a ripple reach different shores. Thomas blinked, the first sign that his certainty had been asked to step aside. Kate's mouth made a small circle of surprise and then closed as if a bell jar had been set over the table to keep the arguments fresh. "That was not your decision to make." Thomas tried, and the choice of tense failed him. The decision had clearly been made. Maggie lifted a second packet from her bag. The rubber band caught the light, ordinary as an errand. She eased it off and laid the papers out without ceremony. The deed to the house, terms of the mortgage retired, the line showing her as owner of record, the letter from the bank detailing her retirement accounts, and the durable power of attorney that she had not exercised for anyone but herself. The paper did not gloat. It simply existed. "This is my home," she said. "This is my money. I kept this in good order. I do not intend to use any of it to punish you. I intend it as a plain backdrop for what I say next." The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen like an old witness. A horn somewhere on the street let out a two-note thought and was quiet again. Emily's hand found the edge of the table and pressed a small anchor in a small storm. Kate looked at Thomas as if he might conjure an argument worth standing on, and when none presented itself, she folded her hands together and inspected her knuckles. "I understand that you find inconvenience uncomfortable," Maggie went on, softening her tone without blunting it. "I understand you wanted a trip where no one slowed you down or required you to make accommodations. I have moved my life around other people's comfort for a long time. I have been useful and quiet and ready. You left me off the list. I put myself on my own." Thomas's jaw worked and then rested. He looked at his mother with a mixture of boy and man's sturdy shoulders, exposed to worry. I thought it would be easier," he said, and the sentence turned into a confession by its own weight. His eyes reddened, not with anger, but with something far less practiced. "Easier for whom?" Maggie asked. Not to accuse, but to place the word back where it belonged. He blinked. The answer did not arrive to rescue him. Kate shifted, a defense rising and falling. "We didn't want you to be tired," she offered, and the hollowness rang gently, like a spoon against an empty cup. "The thing about tired," Maggie said, "is that it comes from many sources." She gathered the envelopes and slid them back into her bag, not to hide them, but to end their work. "I am not angry," she said, and could hear in her own voice that this was true. "I have changed jobs. I am no longer caretaker of your comfort. If you want me in your life, the position available is mother, who is a person." Emily rose without haste and came around the table. She did not declare sides. She placed her arms around Maggie's shoulders and rested her cheek against her grandmother's temple in a gesture that had no audience. Maggie felt the warmth and the steadiness and reached up to hold the girl's forearm and answer without speech. Thomas put his hand to his mouth, a man confronting the ruin of a blueprint and the sudden possibility of architecture done differently. Kate's eyes were on the tart cooling by the window. She seemed to consider if sweetness had any counsel to offer. They finished their meal with small movements and less talk. Maggie stood to clear place and then sat again, letting Thomas rise in her place and collect dishes with a clatter that felt like penance. Kate gathered silverware in careful bundles and did not instruct anyone on how to do it better. Emily wiped a water ring from the wood and put the cloth away, as if to say that cleaning up after messes could be an act of care rather than erasure. When the table was bare except for the faint shine of lemon oil and the place where the envelope had rested, Maggie reached for her bag one more time, but not for papers. She drew out her glasses case, opened it, and set the glasses on her nose with the crisp elegance of someone signing a new contract with herself. She looked at her son and daughter-in-law and let the silence make room the way a good hostess makes space for a latecomer. "Tomorrow is the 4th of July. If you want me at the table watching fireworks, come not to justify, but to listen." As the echoes of fireworks faded over the harbor, what remained was not the noise of celebration, but the quiet of a family learning to sit together again. Maggie's journey has shown that even when love is hidden beneath layers of pride, silence, and neglect, it can be reclaimed with truth spoken plainly and dignity held firm. In every home, there are seasons when old wounds and new misunderstandings threaten to crowd out compassion. Yet forgiveness and respect have the power to clear the table for a fresh meal. Much like a lantern in the window on a dark night, a single act of courage and kindness can light the path for everyone under the same roof. Take a moment to reflect on the quiet gifts of compassion around you. And if this story has stirred something in your heart, consider carrying its warmth forward to those who may be waiting for a sign of grace.